Cartoon Crossroads Columbus acknowledges that the ancient ancestors of the Eastern Woodlands tribes, now referred to as the Adena and Hopewell cultures, inhabited the land we now know as Ohio. Their descendants include the living nations of the Shawnee, Miami, Wyandotte, Delaware, and Seneca Cayuga. We honor and respect the diverse indigenous peoples connected to this place where we gather. We'd like to thank our sponsors, which include the Greater Columbus Arts Council, the Ohio Arts Council, White Castle, and UBS. And without further ado, we'll get started. So as I said, I'm Kevin Necessary. I'm the president of the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists. And this is a panel and discussion about cartooning in a post-truth world. Why don't we introduce ourselves? So we'll just start with Mark here.
I'm Marc Murphy. I draw in Louisville, Kentucky. Until relatively recently, the Courier-Journal also submitted my cartoons to Gannett, but now they get lost in a closet at some trust fund in New York City. So I also draw for an alternative weekly in Louisville and then for Kentucky Public Media.
Okay, I'm Tim Campbell. I live just north of Indianapolis in a town called Carmel, Indiana. The local paper I work for is the Hamilton County Reporter. I'm syndicated nationally through Counterpoint Media and Licensing, and I'm a proud graduate of the Columbus College of Art and Design.
All right.
Making a living.
I'm Ann Telnaes. I work for the Washington Post, and I've been with them since 2008.
So I see plenty of miscreants with these green badges, AAEC members. But thankfully we have some people who are not. I'm assuming are not editorial cartoonists. How many people here are not an editorial cartoonist?
Large number.
All right. Hey, you put your hand out, Mike. You're one of us in spirit. Okay. Does anyone who is not an editorial cartoonist know what we do? All right, you're shaking your head. You don't know what we do. Okay. Does anyone else who is again not an editorial cartoonist want to venture a guess as to what we do? No one? All right. Yeah.
Graphic commentary on news, politics, current events, issues of the day.
That's really good. Yeah, she said graphic commentary.
Thank you, Mrs. Necessary.
Yeah. No, Julie's back there.
I know.
Graphic commentary and analysis on the news of the day, which is exactly right. So we are commenting visually on the news. But there's a big difference between news and what we do, which is opinion. But they do work hand in hand. Now, what we do as editorial cartoonists, we are journalists. We are opinion journalists. Does anyone know the difference between news and opinion? Anyone want to? Anyone want to venture a guess? I mean, if you have a, please feel free.
News are events that happen, and opinion is an interpretation by your eyes of what is reported. The news,
Well, I think that's great. So she was saying that news is what's reported. Opinion is based on someone's view of that news, and hopefully, if it's responsible opinion, it is really grounded in those facts. And are you sure you don't want to come up and be the moderator?
Yeah.
I mean, this would be So what we do as opinion journalists is we do try to create commentary based on fact. So I'd like to just open it up to you guys. What do you feel as professional opinion journalists that you do and how do you keep? Well, hey, let me kind of back up a little bit. What do you feel the difference is between news and opinion?
Well, unfortunately today, sometimes it depends on what TV station you're watching, I think. And that's one of the problems. I mean, the reason that this topic, I guess, was identified by the sponsors was because times have changed and things have changed. And, there came a point, when I was growing up, this makes my children think that I'm much older even than I am, but we all gathered around our TV sets at about the same time every evening, and we listened to Walter Cronkite or 2 or 3 other people tell us what the news was. And nearly as I can recall, except for a few occasions, except when Walter Cronkite slowly took off his glasses when he was describing the assassination of President Kennedy, there was very little commentary at that point. There were no question biases at that time. These were large corporations still in the United States that were telling us what we should understand to be the news. But there still was an element of trust that what they were saying, what Walter was saying, and others was reliable, and that it was vetted. And that if it wasn't proven to be reliable, that there'd be criticism later, and we'd read about it in another reliable, factually reported piece of journalism in the following week. That's changed significantly. And so it's a challenge for editorial cartoonists. As you say, we express opinions. We have bias. But we continue to do the same job, try to do the same job that we've been doing, some people have been doing for decades, in the middle of these changing times. The information world has changed. We continue to try to do the same thing. But it's easy for us to get thrown into the pot of, well, this is just another biased reporting, if you will. This is biased journalism. And the response to that should be, I think from people that do our work, is it is biased. I am expressing my opinion. That's exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. But and I didn't like the word, we talked about this, this program is entitled, How Do Cartoonists Do Their Jobs When Elected Officials, Citizens, and Even Media Outlets Disregard the Truth? And I tend to move away from the word truth because that's almost a philosophical, sometimes even a religious concept. I substitute the phrase fact-based. And if I can publish a cartoon, and no matter how much criticism I get from it, if I can still stand next to that criticism or in front of that criticism and say, I get that you're hurt. I'm sorry that I've offended you. Perhaps you shouldn't have been standing in the direction in which I was shooting, said the preacher at the Southern Baptist Church that I grew up in. But I'm protected in the armor of it being fact-based. The fact that the person's nose doesn't like that, or it doesn't look like that, or that Donald Trump's hair comes out looking differently, that's fine. That's the art that we use to attract the attention. But if the point we're making about immigration or the point we're making about anything else is based in fact, then we can defend that, and we have to.
I agree. Just kind of speaking for myself, how I do things, probably like a lot of editorial cartoonists, we get up in the morning. I'm sorry, do I need to get closer? I start looking at the news on various websites and apps on my phone and on my laptop while I'm having my coffee, and I start jotting down notes about different things that have happened in the last couple of days or are about to happen today, that sort of thing. And I try to sit down and I kind of think, how do I feel about this issue? Like President Biden is wanting to pardon a bunch of people, that have been convicted of marijuana crimes and things like that. How do I feel about that?
It's getting me out of jail.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was 12 when the 70s started, and I was 22 when they ended. You do the math. I have a feeling. Yeah, exactly. And I'm still here, not in jail. But no, I try to think how I feel about things. And I'm kind of in the middle. I really don't lean left or right strongly. It just depends on the issue. So I will sit down and I'll talk to myself and have conversations with myself about what I'm thinking and maybe what's a good visual image that I can, manipulate, try to connect the dots to certain things and create a message. What do I want to say? I'm not there to try to convince somebody to think like I do. I'm trying to get them to maybe just think, to have a conversation about themselves. I heard another cartoonist years ago say what his job is he goes into a bar, throws the first punch, and walks out. And that's kind of what the job is to a certain degree. You're starting a conversation, and sometimes it gets very heated, and you just kind of sit back and let it go. Because I don't want everybody thinking like I do. That would be very scary if everybody agrees with me. We'd be in a lot worse trouble than we are now. But that's kind of what I do. I take something that actually did happen, and throw out my opinion on it. And if you don't like it, that's fine. You have a right not to like it. So that's kind of the job. That's actually one of the perks, I think, is somebody not liking and coming at me with their opinion and trying to prove me wrong. So, but like Mark was saying, if I can stand there behind my work, that's good. I feel better about my day right then. I had a good day if that happens.
Yeah, I think actually it's good to re-stress the point the audience member made about what is the difference that we do. I mean, we are journalists. We're under the umbrella of journalism, but there is the reporting part, which is supposed to be the unbiased part, and we're in the opinion part. So we're just like columnists that you might read, but we do it with images. So I think that's always something I like to stress because, you know, as editorial cartoonists, we take that for granted, but not everybody knows that, especially the younger generation, because as Mark really pointed out very well, he described that we have a problem now with how news is presented and how people take it in, because a lot of people cannot tell what the difference is. I recently taught a class called Commentary Through Cartoons at California Institute of the Arts. And my first one was right in the beginning of 2020. Oh my God, time is just flying. So, you know, this was my first experience with teaching a college-age class. And the first thing I asked them was, how do you get your news? And it was eye-opening, because even though they were very intelligent and frankly very engaged people, you wouldn't believe how many of them get their news just through social media, and they don't fact check it. So the first thing that I did in my class was spent a lot of time talking about how you consume news. And you know what? Why don't we show that?
Yeah.
One of my students actually did this as a final project, and I was so happy because she really got it. She actually did a multi-panel explanation of how you read the news. So, Kevin, I think I can read it.
Yeah.
So the first panel says, tips I learned that can help you become a more critical, oh, and by the way, her name is Erin. What's her last name? I'll think of it in a minute. But
Did she do the art as well?
Oh yeah, she did the art. She wrote the whole thing. She
The
took
artist known as Aaron.
Yeah. I'll look it up in a minute, but she's really wonderful. So tips I learned that help you become a more critical and responsible news consumer. Second source, before believing or sharing anything, can you find the same story elsewhere? If not, that's a red flag. So I said to them, I don't mind that you get a news story from something I haven't heard of, but find it like in a reputable source, the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, something. Just show me the second one before you present this to me.
You know, as one of my journalism professors would always say, if your mother tells you that she loves you, fact check it and get a second source.
Yeah.
I did that. It was not a good experience. But that's a different panel.
That's called therapy.
Okay, so Aaron goes on to say, don't relax yet. Now it's time to fact check. Here are some websites dedicated to that. Factcheck.org, Snopes, PolitiFact, and Pointer.org.
And by the way, you know, the Washington Post also has a great fact checker.
Oh,
there
yes,
too.
he does,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. Behind the curtain. This is actually a really important thing that I don't think a lot of people do. When visiting a website, the first thing I do is go to About Us. Who is it that's doing this website? Who's funding it? I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't read it, but just realize that when you're reading that story, who is putting this on? So check the About Me tab to find out who's behind the content. If you can't, that's another red flag. And there are sites that don't say who's putting this on. So just be aware of that. Citations and experts. Make sure the article cites experts, not just a person with an opinion. So the first thing actually I do when I read an opinion piece, even in the Washington Post, is I'll just scroll down to say who's writing it. Do they work for a think tank? Where do they come from? Just so you know. Avoid watching news with commentary that allows you to think. This allows you to think for yourself without hearing the opinions of others. And C-SPAN, I introduced C-SPAN to them. A lot of them didn't know what that was. occasionally watching news stations you disagree with helps you avoid an echo chamber. And that's all. I mean, editorial cartoons should always be doing that.
Yeah.
It's hearing what's going on the other side. So before believing or posting anything, remember, second source, fact check, inspect the about me, look for experts, avoid commentary. Well, don't avoid commentary, but listen to viewpoints different than your own. I think that's it, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no. These tips will help you make sure you're not adding to the large amount of misinformation. So, I mean, just to close, I mean, a lot of my students, they were very well-meaning, but it was an eye-opener to them that they couldn't just take that story that their friend shared on social media and believe it, So that's how we did
Did
it.
Erin get an A?
She did.
Good for her.
Tip for future students of Ann Telnaes. We talked beforehand, too. There's a difference. We get thrown in, meaning editorial cartoonists, get thrown in the pile of people in the media, right? And that has become, like so many other things, a derogatory term to many because of people that are using it in a derogatory way. There's a lot of propaganda that is shrouded to look like legitimate opinion. There's a lot of partisanship, which is expected and is part of having political parties in a system like ours. One of the things that we discussed was that I don't think there's a thin line, but we certainly have to pay attention to the line that we don't become propagandists and that we don't even become partisan. Now, we all have opinions and we have our biases, and there's no doubt that most of what I draw, most of the time, progressives and liberals and Democrats are going to agree with. And 100% of the time, conservatives and Republicans are going to hate and DM me on. But as I mentioned before, the cartoons that I draw that get the most criticism are the ones in which I've criticized a Democrat. Because the response that I get is, wait a minute, buddy, we thought you were on our side. And the only response that you can make to that is, you don't understand what we do here. That's not our point. I mean, certainly I agree with what's going on over here, and I think there's great dangers expressing an opinion with what's going on over here. And so right now, I'm going to draw about what's going on over here, primarily, because I think that's the greatest danger facing our country right now. As he suggested, it's a great act of hubris to do what we do. It's an act of strength to be a reporter and a journalist, and an act of courage. But they're should be reporting the facts in the news. What we do is, as you said very well, we wake up in the morning or come home from our day job in the evening or whatever and decide, what does the world need to hear from me this evening?
Exactly.
And really, they don't need to hear anything from you that evening, but you've decided to do it anyway. And so you've got to, draw that line, though.
Yeah.
Exactly, literally draw that line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good point.
So, people do lump us in with the media, and we are members of the media. But how should we and how do you talk to people, talk to audiences, if you do at all, trying to get them to understand the differences between what we do as opinion journalists versus the spin you might see on some TV stations, or we're in political ad season. How do you get them to understand the difference between that and what and the work that we produce?
You want me to? Okay. I don't know. I'm not really trying to create spin necessarily, and I'm not trying to say I'm right on my opinions and things like that.
But you are.
You haven't talked to my wife.
But spin is a different word.
Yeah.
Spin is where, in the spin room after a debate, the candidate's handlers try to fix what he did wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And so we're not spinners.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not, not really. I'm just trying to get people to maybe look at something a little bit differently from a different perspective. Hey, have you thought about this or that about this issue? Sometimes I'm really just trying to mirror what I think people are thinking in my community. If I'm doing something local for the local paper, I'm trying to think, talk to my friends and how they're feeling about something. And I'm trying to say, how can I reflect that in my work? When it comes to something like, okay, this cartoon I did up here, this was like a week ago when Ian was coming and we were talking about things being boarded up and what's coming and stuff like that. And I thought, you know what, I'm seeing all these people boarding up things, and there's one last thing they need to board up, in my opinion, because I mean, I'm tired of this. I think everybody else is a little bit tired of it. It's been a couple of years now, and he's still out there. And I really have not drawn him since President Biden took office. I've drawn things about January 6th, but I didn't draw Trump until August when the Mar-a-Lago raid happened. So I've done a couple of these now just because it's like, that's enough. I've had enough of you. Go away. But he's not going to go away. And I wish he'd go away in an orange suit somewhere. But that's my opinion. I wanted to take a shot at him. So I got two things here. I got to throw a little bit of Ian as the topic and actually throw Trump because he's still in Florida. And I saw a meme, which that's not what we do. We don't do memes, but I did see a good one where somebody said, Ian, you had one job, and it was just a picture of Mar-a-Lago. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
yeah, but
okay,
it's,
but I'm
it's
just
probably
talking.
even better. Yeah.
I'm just talking. So.
But you know, all right. So, but I mean, you know, looking at this caricature, and this is and one of the things that we do all the time is we do caricatures, we do exaggerations. So, you know, exaggeration and satire, you know, is part of our bread and butter. As Ann pointed out, you know, in our pre-discussion outside, that this is part of our toolbox. How do we make sure that we you know, we tell the audience and, you know, get the audience to understand that when we exaggerate, when we really blow things up in a cartoon, that it is, you know, it is different than any kind of propaganda, or it's different than what you might see, you know, at, you know, in the, you know, on let's say Tucker Carlson or something, you know, one of those shows. How do we separate what we do as something responsible versus, you know, while still using exaggeration and really going big?
Well, I think that goes back to the description of our panel that you talked about, is how do we deal with the fact that things are so outrageous now in the news, you know, what they will just lie, basically, or spin, as they put it.
Yeah.
So, and that's different for us because we used to be the outrageous ones, right? And I've heard more than once my colleagues talk about, like, how can I outdo what is already out there? And I think that's something new that we've had to deal with. I mean, I know I have. Sometimes I get, because of the disinformation, sometimes I will basically do, even though it's still commentary, I'll throw facts in it. Like if you want to pull up that one COVID piece. So this was in August of 2020. I did so I had followed everything that Trump had said from the beginning, you know, when nothing's wrong, it's going to go away, no one's died, this is fine. And I got really tired as the time went on that not only he, but his enablers would talk about, oh, no, we didn't say that in the beginning. We knew perfectly well what was going on. You know, it was bad. We were dealing with it. So I went back. I went through my sketchbook where I had written down quotes. And this is where your homework comes in. I went back and rechecked my quotes. So I went, you know, online. Did I actually write that down correctly? And then my editors went through it when I did this and made sure I had all the dates and all the quotes exactly right. And they are good. I mean, if I do a misplaced apostrophe, they're like, Ann, this is wrong. Mm-hmm. So this is what this cartoon was. And I purely did it because I was tired of seeing, you know, the spin. You know, they were changing the narrative. That's what that is a big thing that's been happening a lot. And I think everybody should be aware of that. Not just editorial cartoonists, but as a reader. Don't just take, I mean, Ted Cruz, my favorite politician, just this morning, and I haven't had a chance to go online and respond to him because I'm going to. He retweeted something. He said, it's actually the Democrats that are inciting violence. And I'm like, oh, really? You know, January 6th, have you forgotten about this? So, you know, if you just say it, they think that they can change people's minds because people forget. So that is the reason that I think we as editorial cartoonists, I mean, we're still doing commentary, but we're going to have to throw in some hard facts in there in our commentary, just because I think of the way the news is going.
Well, I mean, I find that very interesting because I know with my stuff, I have been pulling back a little bit more, and like it's just much more. It's less outrageous because, you know, as you said, you know, we as a profession, we used to be much more outrageous. I feel like you know, because of the news climate and because of what's out there, you know, maybe it's even on a subconscious level, but I'm kind of pulling back. Whereas, you know, you see other people like, you know, Matt Davis is a great example of really kind of going out there and making these like bold, like wacky, associations with cartoons. Do either of you, feel that way? Like has the outrageousness of news and the misinformation out there made you change what you do?
I think definitely. And to the point of the people who aren't editorial cartoonists who are in the room, the beauty of what Ann's done here is that you have probably had the opportunity to read 150,000 words about the falsehoods about COVID from Donald Trump and from the Republican Party. And you've probably only read about 1,000 of those words because they're everywhere. And you could pick up any reliable publication and they're going to do that. But on the other hand, you see that image, which is what the editorial cartoonists do. We're blessed or cursed with the ability to produce visual imagery as opposed to just words. And when you combine the words with the imagery like she's done there, I mean, the first thing obviously that you see when you look at that image, whether it would be in the print paper or online or here, is clearly we've come to understand that being a representative of the Omicron or of the virus, of the COVID virus. And then you look closer, you go, oh my God, that's a mouth. And and those are eyeballs, and that's Donald Trump because of the invisible inverted eyebrows. That then draws the reader, not necessarily people in this room, but others, to learn the things that Ann is trying to get us to understand. I remember, Kevin, to your question, there was a time when I felt the rise of a level of fascism in the United States, and I drew a cartoon and submitted it to my editors that had a Nazi flag on it. And they said at the time that we don't do that. And it was considered a thing that you didn't do. You don't go full Nazi. I remember when, at about the same time, when women's rights began to be under attack, that I used, not being indelicate here, but I used a coat hanger in a cartoon and submitted it to my editors. It stood for the fact that women would have to take care of themselves and travel, and there'd be deaths and suffering in that regard. Same response. We're not going to publish that because it's too outrageous. I think what's happened, and even in I've only been doing this for 15 years, is that to me, we've almost come full circle. Then it became pretty quickly appropriate to call it out and say, yeah, that's a Nazi flag. Oh, by the way, this is just a photograph from Charlottesville. And there's a Nazi flag. So Eric, I'll use it in a cartoon. The coat hanger has been used by many of the political cartoonists in this room and at this convention because of what it has come to mean, even though it may still be an awful and painful image to women and the people who love them. I think we've come now almost full circle where those images don't say enough.
Yeah. Exactly.
They're not good enough. I've got to be better than that. I've got to come up with something more outrageous somehow or more telling.
And it's not just us. It's also the news organizations. Because I remember when the Post, in the beginning, when Trump first came on the scene, we were not allowed to use the word lie for him. And in fact, I even had an editor. I didn't even put it in my cartoon. I had my label of my file had Trump lie. And I don't know, maybe, and he said, no, you can't do that. And I'm like, oh, okay. It didn't take long for it to change that we could use the word lie. Another thing that my editor let me use, and I'm sorry if there are children in here, but the word pussy, he let me use that in a cartoon, which he never would have let me until Trump said it.
Well, I remember, I was taught in journalism school that you could not say anything that would never be printed on the front page of the New York Times. And now everything from the F word on down has been printed in full on the front page of the New York Times.
So we have the shifting for us too, that you have to deal with that.
You could also argue that we're leading the way because we wanted to say those things. You wanted to call them lies before your paper was willing to call them lies.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I had a cartoon that I did back in, I think, 2016 where I think it was I called it the Republican platform and I had Trump on top. But the platform was, it just spelled out lies.
They wouldn't let
and and I was working at a TV news station at the time, and they took that down from Facebook.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Because it was so, that was so outrageous at the time that any news organization would call anything that a politician said a lie, and it just, it was one bridge too far. So. Because we are members of the media, we are journalists, and what we do is often outrageous. what happens? What do you do when people, who are, who get, alternate facts, or, who buy into, unsourced news sites? What do you do, and how do you respond when people say, "Well, look at this drawing of Trump that you did. He's not a gangster. He's not a coronavirus. He's not drilling, a board into his face." How do you respond, and say that what we do is different than what you might find on Tucker Carlson or ONA or something like that?
Well, I think having the art background, I mean, doing something outrageous visually is the first thing you want to do to draw attention to this. That's why I draw people that are kind of, they're usually kind of round bodies and long extended appendages and things like that. Like this guy here. I mean, here, I like this one because I got to draw crap and imply the F word too, to make a point here. So that was kind of fun. It's like, I get paid to do this. I got to do the F word and draw crap and hit Trump a little bit there. So just pushing and pulling is kind of like learning. I actually taught art for a while, and one of the things is we're such visual creatures. You don't pay attention to 99% of everything you look at every day. It's like, how many trees did you see coming here today? Did any of them stand out for any reason at all? If one of them was on fire, you would have stopped and looked at that, okay? You see how many cars coming here, but if you see an orange Corvette or something like that, or an antique car from 1920, that stands out. So with your drawings and stuff like that, you want to push and pull and exaggerate, and as we said, put a little jam on the bread to get people to actually stop on that page and see what you're doing, okay? And then you draw them in to read it, okay? It's like the beginning of a movie or a book. You want to grab them real quick and tell them not to leave, okay?
That's a good one.
And it's kind of like a billboard too. You want them to get the message as they're driving by it at 60 miles an hour. So you have to be kind of quick or at least bring them in so that they will take the time to read what your words are and things like that. So you need to exaggerate. And the world's gotten more exaggerated anyway. I mean, when I was a kid, I mean, you had the news came on at 6, and it came on again at 11, and you had a newspaper in the morning, and that was about it. Yeah. Now it's 24/7. I remember talking to Scott Stannis one time, and he said, you could go for days.
Scott Stannis, who it is?
Oh, editorial cartoonist.
We only talk to other editorial cartoonists.
That's true. Yeah, close little club.
No.
But he was right. You could go for days without knowing what the president was doing, and now it's like every 15 minutes you know what he's doing. He's tweeting or something like that, or the news comes on. Your CNN app gives you an alert or something like that, telling you what they're doing, what they're signing, what's going on. So there's a lot of news out there, and you have to pick and choose what you're going to talk about. So sometimes that's very hard to actually pick which outrageous thing to make a comment on that day.
Well, that's a really good point. You have to, as an editorial cartoonist, there's a lot of silly stuff out there.
Oh, yeah.
We have to make a choice. And I, especially during the Trump administration, I would go and I'd sit there and what do I want to comment on right now? What's the most important? Is it really important that he tweeted out Covfefe or whatever that was?
Covfefe.
Or is it maybe that he's destroying the Environmental Protection Agency? That might be a better topic.
Well, but that brings up a good point. So so many politicians and so many public officials are putting out misinformation.
Uh-oh. We're almost done.
Yeah. The suffering will end. So many people are coming out and and we are covering all of that all the time. Whatever Trump says or whatever Biden says. Do you find yourself commenting on the misinformation, like drawing cartoons? Like I did, so many cartoons about ivermectin and about here in Ohio, there was a woman who spoke, just a couple blocks away at the State House, claiming that because she got the vaccine, she was now magnetic, and on TV in front of the General Assembly, because she was invited there by a state representative, she was trying to stick keys, metal keys on her face and chest, and they kept falling off, but she was insisting that those keys, that she was magnetic. And so I drew a cartoon promoting really the lies that she was spouting and the lies that, and this was a nurse, by the way, a medical professional. So I mean, do you find yourselves commenting on the misinformation, and is that spreading the misinformation?
It's hard. you mentioned memes, and people have asked me if meme culture has made our jobs more difficult. And my take on it is it's made it easier and it's made me be better, because the easy stuff that may not be super important, like Ann said, you can make fun of Covfefe, or you can write about the destruction of our republic, and she chooses the destruction of our republic. The memes, I think, occupy the time and the headspace of the public in the easy direction. And I think to me, I've always looked at them as a way of sort of cleansing the palate so that we can come in and talk about the important things.
And by the way, if you do want to see someone, like really set off, start asking Ann about memes, especially in an academic setting.
Yeah, I mean, we're going off a little bit, but I think memes can be editorial cartoons, but they're not all editorial cartoons. Some of them are just funny. I mean, we have to have a point of view. That's what an editorial cartoon has. So, I mean, the only time I go off on it is when somebody thinks that they should get rid of editorial cartoons for memes. I'm like, no, you shouldn't, because they don't all have commentary in them. Some of them are just funny.
So, we're getting close to the end of the session. Does anyone have any questions?
I think it's a tool we can use. I think it depends on the cartoonist. I mean, we all know Mike Peters, who is an editorial cartoonist who is also a comic strip, and he does some devastating editorial cartoons, but he's pretty damn funny. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't describe myself as particularly funny, I don't tend to, but it's part of our toolbox. But I mean, I know I sound like a broken record, but I always tell, especially when I'm talking to students, the big difference between all the cartoonists here and editorial cartooning is that we have to have a point of view, which doesn't mean that a lot of cartoonists up there aren't doing commentary. They are, but they don't have to, but we do. We have to have a point.
Yeah, I think comedy is just it's gravy on the biscuit kind of thing. I'll have a reader say, "You're not funny at all," and it's like, well, that's not the job I'm doing here. I'm not trying to make you laugh. That's what Beetle Bailey's for, or something like that. I'm here to say something, but if I can get it in there, if I can have, Trump screwing himself like he's doing right there, that's kind of funny. And you can all relate to this as kind of like a Saturday morning cartoon, Wile E. Coyote type thing happening here. So there's a little bit of humor, but I'm also saying something here. I'm saying, this guy's doing this to himself. Yeah. So that's the message.
And, and just to go back to what Ann was saying, about a lot of people who do, who are just cartoonists, but, do put into commentary, I think the big distinction for us is that we are, at least we hope that we are acting as journalists, and that we are, holding ourselves to, a standard. And there's a little bit of that hubris that Mark was pointing out, that, who appointed us. But I feel like, if you get to this point where you are in this association and you're doing this work, you are trying to be as responsible as a journalist and as a citizen as you can be, rather than just going and saying, like, well, I'm going to throw whatever is on the top of my head onto a page without really backing it up.
I'd rather have people think than laugh. And in a perfect world, I'd be skilled enough to make them do both. Although there's nothing funny about so many of the things that we're writing about now. Sometimes I think that if we tried to turn it into a gag single panel, it would be disrespecting the issue and disrespecting the debate.
Phil?
I don't know that you do.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I was in politics, what they used to say was that a bumper sticker never changed anybody's opinion and made them vote differently than they were going to, but it made the person in the car, behind the car with the bumper sticker, feel supported, and that they weren't alone in supporting that particular candidate. And for better or worse, I don't think that my cartoons have ever made a person change their political philosophy. And however, I do know that they have made people who share at that time, that opinion, I'm not a propagandist and I'm not a partisan, but I feel that if I've sent that out into the universe, it's made some people feel better about the things that they were feeling, have perhaps the courage to go talk to others about it. I think that's all I can do. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, some of the comments I get, it's like, I would laugh if that wasn't so true. I mean, that's one of the best comments I get from somebody in supporting my work. It might be funny, ha-ha, but it's like, it's really sad that this is true. That makes me feel good. That makes me feel like I've done my job. Then again, when somebody just totally disagrees with me and you're a jerk and starts calling me names, and it's kind of like, okay, I kind of enjoyed that a little bit too.
But don't you wake up, Phil, don't you wake up every morning and think, this is the day I draw the greatest political cartoon that's ever been drawn?
Every day.
Every single day. And this is going to change the world, just like people who write songs and play music. This will be the most beautiful song ever written. Mm-hmm. And then it's not. Gonna.
But you get a chance the next day to do it again.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I do.
That's the nice thing.
I mean, every day. Yeah.
We were here in 2019, and I was very moved by comments that Ann made. She stands in very different shoes. Sometimes those are high-heeled shoes. As maybe never. Okay.
Too old.
Okay. But when you compare personally, when I compare what I do, and I had written down the comments I got just on yesterday's cartoon, and they two of them ended with pedophile. That sort of accusation. So uncreative, lots of swear words and threats. I immediately think of what Ann had gone through that she described to us a couple of years ago, and that was somebody like Pedro Molina deals with in Nicaragua. Yeah. So we're not there yet, although there are people who are encouraging the fight, as you said. But
yeah, I think the difference for us is we've always had criticism that has never changed, as we all know. Every single one of my colleagues. I mean, but it's changed because of social media. In the beginning, the most a person could do is write a letter to the editor. Mm-hmm. And then, they'd come and they'd picket outside of your newspaper. Signe had that lots of times with her cartoons. They'd come out and picket against her, But then social media really brought it in. And to the incident that you're talking about, I have never had the misogyny ever directed toward me that I did during that incident with the Cruz cartoon. And you know what? I remember when I was watching my actual photograph splashed across Fox News for it seemed like 5 minutes. I was like, why don't you just, paint a bullseye on me so when I go outside, someone can, kill me. I was nervous for a little minute, I would step outside my door and kind of go, and see, is anybody on the street? But you know what? After a while, it's nothing, like you said, compared to our other colleagues across the ocean. Oh, yeah. I mean, people get beat up, they get thrown in jail, they're killed. And, I don't feel quite that way yet. I hope it doesn't change.
Yeah, well, I mean, you brought up, Pedro, who is an excellent, editorial cartoonist, but, he and I were chatting, and he was saying, he's beginning to see that a little bit here more and more. And he's, he came here to, to escape that kind of thing. And there's, because he brings, such a unique perspective, not being from here, he's beginning to see it a little bit.
Well, nobody makes us do this, and true. I don't think that it's chicken or egg. Did we develop thick skins doing it, or were we always that person who didn't think that deeply about those sort of threats? I don't know.
One more. Yeah, I think we can do one more question. Compliment?
Yeah, compliment.
Well, in my case, I've had here in Ohio, I had Governor DeWine have one of his press conferences, and he had very complimentary. He's had my cartoon on a screen next to him as he's talked about it, and it wasn't even about him. It was about like staying home, and it was, but it was still COVID related. And I think that's the first and last time that will ever happen. They don't like me very much.
Depending on the issue, I mean, I get calls relatively frequently, usually from local politicians. They want a signed copy of something. Someone visited Mitch McConnell's office a couple years ago and said he had 3 of mine framed behind his desk, and it made me wonder where he got those because I didn't send them to him.
Oh, okay.
So he's a thief. Besides ruining the United States Supreme Court forever, he's also a thief.
Have you checked the security camera?
Yeah.
I mean, I did. I was hounded on with texts and phone calls from the mayor of Cincinnati, the previous mayor of Cincinnati, who every time I did a new cartoon about him and showed his short-ish stature, I would always get like phone calls, texts, just wanting to take me out to lunch one day, or let's go get a drink. I think he was hoping like his hitman would come and find me as I walked out of the house. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some local politicians want my work, and it wasn't really about them. They just liked the cartoon, and can I have a copy of that? I do know the mayor of where I'm from Carmel, Indiana. We're like the roundabout capital of the country. There's like 150 of them now. And the mayor actually took one of my cartoons on roundabouts and uses it in like his PowerPoint presentation when he goes to other cities and talks about the development and
Do you
stuff
get paid
like that.
for that?
No, I don't think I do. I think he just kind of stole it off the website
Yeah.
and used that. So, but he hasn't raised my taxes, so maybe that's a.
It really kills me, the ones that want the cartoons that are critical of them.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Donald Rumsfeld during the Bush administration was notorious for that. I had his office contact me several times, and I never did a nice cartoon about him. But they once contacted Matt Worker. I don't think he'll mind me telling him the story, but they contacted Matt Worker for one, and Matt wrote back, to the assistant that was asking for it, "Sure, I'll give him the original. Just tell him to stop the war."
Oh, there you go. That's a good price.
That's awesome.
So I know we have to wrap up, and thank you all for being here. Very quickly, how do you cut through the BS?
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
We got to wrap up. You got 3 seconds. Here's the
Yeah.
deepest philosophical question you've asked us.
All right.
You mean the misinformation you're talking about?
Misinformation. Yeah.
Do your homework.
Yeah.
A sharp
Get the
pencil.
facts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A very sharp pencil.
Yeah, do your homework. Absolutely.
All right.
That's it.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you.